I do love just admiring my shelf here. I'm a bit of a plastic fanatic, you could say. Though these days there seems to be a big divide between whether physical is still important in the gaming industry or if digital really is the future. Now, personally, I don't really like the idea of an all-digital future. I prefer this big rectangle when it's filled with smaller plastic rectangles, thank you very much. However, despite the support from many gamers and collectors, physical games have been suffering more and more in recent times. Digital games are a lot of people's preferred method of buying and consuming content these days, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's extremely quick, you get to play games the moment they become available, and it's significantly easier than having to go out, find one of many dwindling video game retailers, then interact with other people bombarding you with membership offers or other useless crap. The games industry has taken notice of this and has gradually tried to prioritize digital over physical since the 7th generation of consoles, that being the Nintendo Wii, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3. Ensuring that players download the games they want has changed how physical games are perceived in the industry and has since pushed them over to second fiddle. I remember being super hyped for the Spyro Reignited trilogy back in 2018. Then the news broke that the whole trilogy wouldn't be on the disc. Spyro 1 would be on there in its entirety, but Spyro 2 and 3 only had a few levels on there each. You could have stabbed me and it would hurt less. This might have been due to the tight deadline, initially being planned for a September release before being pushed back to November 13th. Hey, that's one day after my birthday. The game did eventually get a reprint in 2019, which included all the content on the disc. So even if they couldn't do this the first time around, why not do what the Final Fantasy VII games would do a couple years later and provide a second disc to install the extra data? Now, I get Blu-rays are expensive to produce, but they hold a lot of space, and don't tell me fucking Activision, sitting on their stacks of annual Call of Duty money, couldn't afford it. They're Activision. Minecraft Story Mode was made to answer the one burning question on everyone's mind. When will the suffering end? Like most of the Telltale games, Season 1 was originally launched as a Season Pass. Episode 1 was on the disc, and the disc itself unlocked the ability to download episodes 2 through 5 as they became available for free. Then they announced 3 other episodes as part of the Adventure Pass, which had to be purchased separately. After all 8 episodes were released, a complete Adventure Edition was shipped to retailers, the whole game ready to play from the get-go, no caveats. Season 2 never got this luxury, but I was able to download the rest of that game with the disc even after Telltale Games underwent bankruptcy and Mojang's license expired. Small victories, I guess. Very few of their games actually got full releases this way after 2012, such as The Wolf Among Us, Tales from the Borderlands, and all 5 Walking Dead games, with the rest being subjected to season passes only. Live service games with physical releases are interesting cases. Games such as Dead by Daylight and Temtem require constant online connectivity and are updated so often that the game on the disc is nowhere near the same game you can play now. And since there's no offline single-player modes when the servers shut down, they also make for very nice elaborate coasters. You can also get games like Dreams, which just falls short of this category seeing as most of its content is player-generated and distributed. The disc build without any updates only gives you access to the Arch Dream game and dream shaping modes. In other words, a glorified demo, but a demo you could still toy around with and experiment at least, so I hesitate to really call it a live service. Just keep these kinds of games in mind, because I will bring them up later. Something that really irks me about games these days are the games that come in boxes. Wait, where's the asterisk? Ah, there it is. I'm referring to the ones that are shipped to retailers like any other game, but only contain a download code. It's a trend that seems to be most common on the Switch, but occasionally it is seen on the other platforms too. The only games that I have here that are download codes in boxes are the 2 most recent Just Dance games, 2023 and 2024 editions. The new Just Dance opts the live service route, with both codes unlocking a different pack of songs within the Just Dance app. The thing is, game boxes are, or at least were, built to last for their purpose: storage. This is due to the type of plastic they used, which is a bitch to recycle. In fact, if it did get recycled at all, it'd be lucky as discarded cases are often wasted plastic regardless. And yet they still include disc or card holders anyway, just to really rub salt into the wound. Pretty much every modern PC release has foregone a physical counterpart because of online storefronts such as Steam, Epic Games, GOG, and more dominating the landscape, as well as the lack of disk drives on recent computers becoming the norm. But the non-physical physical release sometimes rears its ugly head for those games. Another thing that annoys me with gaming these days is that games are released in, frankly, abysmal states. It's not like people expect a working game when they give you their money and you don't slap a disclaimer on the front so you don't lose any sales, because that'd make your product look bad. Products like Cyberpunk 2077, Sonic Colors Ultimate,
Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, the Alone in the Dark remake, Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach, and so much more. All games with inexcusably broken disc or cart builds that needed patches to fix the broken mess that you bought with your money, to make the bugs less apparent, or in worst case scenarios, make the game playable. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 is an infamous example within the last 10 years. People had to install a day one 8GB patch when the game shipped on the disc was only 4GB.
And what was this 80GB patch? 90% of the fucking game.
The disc only had the tutorial and creator pack modes because of hasty development and production. Activision sat on the Tony Hawk license to gawk at Skylanders, and when they realised it was almost over, they pushed Robomodo to make a Pro Skater 5.
The plastic skateboard people.
Interestingly, my copy has every level playable on the disc, except for the 3 they added post-launch. So, this is either a very common misconception, or my copy is a later print. Even after the supposed fixes, the game still runs and plays like a paranoid narcoleptic goldfish anyway. Oh, and let's add forced online playing to the mix for funsies, even on private match mode. So the update stops you from playing altogether because the servers shut down in 2018. Unless you go out of your way to disconnect your console from the internet, so what was even the point of the forced online to begin with? Games come out unfinished and slapped hastily onto store shelves because the company bigwigs want to appease the shareholders sooner and make more money. That's their bottom line at the end of the day. Profit. They don't care if the game comes out broken, because they want that money now, and don't give a shit about their fans who are willing to part with their hard-earned cash. And when the servers of the current generation of consoles finally go offline, these unpatched versions will be all we have to play. No bug fixes, no DLC, no performance improvements, nothing. Patch fixes are just short-term solutions to a long-term problem.
I'm not trying to say games never came out unfinished back in my day, because that's just a blatant lie. It was just far less common. The developers or publishers had to make sure they got it right, and if they didn't, they would feel the brunt of that. Spyro Enter the Dragonfly is a very good example of this.
The game would have been lucky to get a reprint, and even then, that wasn't the be-all end-all solution because the damage was done. They had to make sure they got it right. The fact that Sega forced out a game as notoriously broken as Sonic Colors Ultimate with audio-visual issues in every crevice, when the original Wii version ran as smooth as butter just over 10 years prior, is fucking embarrassing. Ooh, I've always wanted to hear how Reach for the Stars would sound if someone corrupted the audio file in a 144p YouTube video. It sounds great! However, in my opinion, there is still plenty of merit to buying physical games in the year of our Lord and Saviour 2024, so let's take down a few of the common counters towards physical, shall we? Actually, games still need to install because the disc is a glorified license, so there's no point in owning a physical copy anymore.
Let me show you something. This is how a lot of PC games used to work, excluding the ones that had that pesky digital rights management bullshit.
The game is on the hardware, and the game installs from the hardware onto your system.
If you can install a PC game from the 2000s, 2010s onto your computer running Windows 7, you can install a PS5 game onto your console in 2024. I don't know how that's so hard to comprehend.
There's a fun little website you can visit right now called Does It Play, a database with the sole focus of trying to find which games are playable fresh out the box, and which ones need external online support. It's an incredibly useful tool for finding games you can just buy and play without having to worry if you're missing out on any major content updates, bug fixes, or performance buffs. Digital games, on the other hand, must install more data because it doesn't run anything off a disc. Just like the DLC and the updates, the base game needs to be saved onto your console. Meanwhile, you pop in the disc, and in most cases, that is just the base game. Despite the examples I brought up earlier, there are still many games out there that are complete on the hardware, no major installs or internet connection required. It's not as bleak as a lot of people seem to think, or as I may have implied. Here are some examples from my own collection with the help of the Does It Play database.
Metroid Prime Remastered, Undertale, Gunbrick Reloaded, Untitled Goose Game, Bendy and the Ink Machine, Cuphead with the delicious Last Course DLC on the disc and cart, the Dragon Quest Builders duology, the Angry Video Game Nerd 1 and 2 Deluxe, Crypt of the Necrodancer, Amplified DLC is on the cart, Until Dawn, Alan Wake Remastered, Crash Bandicoot 4, Bayonetta Origins, Turnip Boy Commits Tax Evasion, Resident Evil 2, 3 and 4 remakes, Rise of the Tomb Raider, even on Xbox 360 bitch, No More Heroes 3, Mario 3D World plus Bowser's Fury, Vectronome, Enchanted Portals, Deathloop. A good thing to look out for if you want to know whether a game requires a significant patch or update is if the game box explicitly says, hey, this game needs a patch or update.
Well, I bought the digital copy anyway, so they can't take that away from me. I'd like to think that too, but the truth is the digital retailers have full control over your purchases. While infrequent, they can revoke access to your games anytime they want or stop people from buying them outright. Remember when Sony tried to pull Discovery shows from PlayStation because of their expired licensing agreements? Anyone who bought them wouldn't be able to access them anymore, nor be given a refund. Sony ended up backpedaling and renewing the license to keep these shows available, but only after users addressed their concerns. Now this is just an example of TV shows, but who's to say that other store runners can't do the same with their digital goods?
As if they haven't considered that already.
Not to sound pedantic, but when you buy something digitally, you do not buy the product. You buy a license to access said product. With physical, you can buy it, they can delist it, but you can still play it. Sure, those purchases might be tied to your account, but what if your account gets wrongfully banned or stolen? General unreliability of these stores is why I can never really see myself going all digital or buying an all digital console. I'm a collector. I like being able to own what I buy.
I don't get why people would want to lock themselves out of the option of physical with a digital console anyway, because years down the line, when there's no server support for these consoles, physical's going to be the only method to revisit them. We saw it happen with the Wii U and 3DS last year, and it'll happen for every other console down the line as well.
Personally, I just can't enjoy something if it feels like a glorified rental, and knowing that I don't technically own anything I buy digitally has stopped me from purchasing some significant titles. Alan Wake 2 and Tomb Raider 1 through 3 Remastered being rather recent examples, the latter of which inspiring me to make this video in the first place. Alan Wake 2 makes sense to a degree, I suppose, as when I was tracking down a copy of Alan Wake 1's remaster, I heard that it didn't sell enough physically, and Remedy probably didn't want to take any risks. Tomb Raider, on the other hand, would probably be handled by Limited Run Games, with both the Tomb Raider IP and LRG being owned by Embracer Group. Speaking of LRG, for those unfamiliar, there are companies like Limited Run Games that do timed physical releases of games, hence the name. They're not the only ones that do this, but they are the ones I've had the most experience with. They set pre-order windows, which usually last for a couple months, then the games are put into production, you wait for the game to arrive in approximately a few more months, and then that is typically it. But very rarely do they ever reprint games they've already published, so if you miss out on buying one, you'll have to look to the second-hand market, where those same games can potentially go for fucking extortionate prices because resellers are dog shit.
It's even more baffling when it's higher-end releases like the Persona remasters. Not even obscure indie games, fully fledged, high-budget, high-end releases, owned by Sega. But hey, at least they're complete on the disc.
Now, a lot of physical releases from Limited Run do make sense, usually of the smaller indie variety, where these kinds of games wouldn't have the insane budget to produce physical copies anyway. Stuff like the Nitro developed ones, or the Sam & Max remasters. They make sense. Which is why Sega and Atlas going to Limited Run doesn't. LRG also brought us physical copies of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World the Game to us, years after one of the most infamous delistings in gaming history. It's prolonging preservation, yes, but when the hard copy is scarce and pricey enough when you do find it on eBay or other second-hand sites, it only worsens inflation within the collector's market. The games on their own being just as sought after and expensive as all the collector's editions out there is honestly ludicrous, and possibly quite intimidating for people who want to get into the collecting hobby. It's very similar to what happened with Mario 3D All-Stars now that I think about it, except that's even more egregious since that was handled directly by bloody Nintendo. Corporations like that don't care about preserving their classics unless it makes them a quick buck to thrive off the fear of missing out. What I'm saying is that limited releases like this are dumb. Something that's become heartbreaking to see is that physical games are gradually being ditched by more and more retailers. They don't make much of a profit from them now as digital has slowly become a more convenient, faster, and readily available alternative. But most sales charts behind clickbait headlines show that if we're talking exclusively about the games, no DLCs or microtransactions, the split is practically 1-to-1. An audience for physical games still exists and is still going strong, yet Best Buy and Walmart in the US are two examples of shops giving up on physical media, especially games. And as for the stores that do specialize in video games, Their stock is incredibly small or even hidden off to the side. I used to visit Game all the time when I got my first PlayStation 2, since they almost always had deals on used video games. Video games which covered the whole shop. Nowadays, Game is nothing more than a footnote within the claustrophobic depths of Sports Direct stores and bombarded with knickknacks that have almost nothing to do with gaming.
Very fucking intuitive.
Game also recently announced that they're going to stop trade-ins, which is another blow to the consumer friendliness physical media provides in the form of used games. The games industry hates the used game market because big companies don't see any profit from those extra sales, just the initial purchase. Why spend all that money to produce physical copies of games when the average consumer can trade them in once they're finished, lend them to a friend, or resell them for above market value? Most of my collection consists of used games because growing up it was the most cost-effective way to buy and play what I wanted. To counter this, digital storefronts, mainly on consoles, very rarely have their games go down in price, specifically the first-party exclusive titles from Xbox, PlayStation, and Nintendo themselves. And all this digital stuff is solely reliant on an internet connection. Game companies just kind of seem to take our Wi-Fi access for granted these days, because not everyone has super fast, instantaneous upload-download speeds. This is especially the case if you're like me and you live in a rural area, where Wi-Fi seems to behave whenever it feels like that day. The time it takes to download anything varies from person to person, location to location. I work 5 days a week, need to help maintain the house, and get other shit done, so why would I want to wait for hours on end to install a game that may or may not respect the time I took to even download it? Just let me slap the game in the machine. Let me install the content from the disc and let me play. That's all I want. As of writing this video, there has been a campaign launched by Ross Scott, otherwise known as Accursed Farms, here on YouTube, to fight back against the legally ambiguous anti-consumer practices game publishers partake in, namely when it comes to revoking players' access to the games they have already paid for. The movement was sparked after Ubisoft,
You can't fucking escape them.
announced to and subsequently shut down the servers for their game The Crew. This was a game with a player base of 12 million players, by the way, and still going strong after its nearly 10-year lifespan. Physical or digital, you can't play it anymore because Ubisoft said so. Why should a game with an active community that's also playable solo be shut down for everyone just because it was tied to some live service bullshit? It's because companies, like I said, don't want you to own anything they publish. You will own nothing and you will be happy. You signed the end-user license agreement, your concerns don't matter. In The Crew's case, Ubisoft probably wanted to draw more attention to the sequels, The Crew 2 and The Crew Motorfest.
Sequels to a game you can't even play anymore? Wild. However, Ubisoft is based in France, a country with very tight consumer protection laws. That's a pretty bold move, but also one that might be a catalyst for changing the industry. But it wasn't enough to just shut down the servers for the game. Now we're actively removing it from everyone's Ubisoft Connect accounts. This game is no longer available. Why don't you check the store to pursue your adventures? In layman's terms, we stole your money, we stole your game, give us more money so we can do it a second time because it's funnier.
So many single-player games that fell under games as a service are lost to time because big corpos don't feel like supporting it anymore and refuse to issue patches to disable the DRM and online settings, while also denying your refunds. Even the bad ones, like Square Enix's Babylon's Fall, there are still people that would want to play. The campaign is aiming to rally attention on government petitions across the world to get noticed by lawmakers to ensure games are functional even after being abandoned, reaffirming our consumer rights. That's the gist of it, but I'd recommend watching Accursed Farm's video on the situation. I'll put a link in the description for anyone who's interested. This is important because game preservation is not as high of a priority compared to music, TV, and movie preservation. You can download MP3 files, buy CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays, vinyl records seemingly indefinitely, because they're much easier to replicate. There's less moving parts, less things that can go wrong, but games are far more volatile in this regard. The hardware for a lot of them to function is far more specific. According to a study from the Video Game History Foundation last year, only 13% of all published games are actively preserved and distributed today. As for that other 87%, well, you better enjoy hunting down the correct hardware for small fortunes or set sail for the Seven Seas if you catch my drift. If I get sent to jail for emulating Finding Nemo on the GameCube getting it to run smoothly, so be it.
Ultimately, I don't like where the future of gaming is heading. Now, I don't think physical media is going to go extinct anytime soon, at least not until the plastic starts to rot away. And I don't outright hate the idea of digital, it's just that there is quite a lot of progress for it to go through before it can be considered a viable alternative, in my opinion. I think that physical and digital games both have their benefits over each other, so for the time being, if anything, they should just coexist. Do away with digital-only consoles in favour of always having the option. Let the users decide how they spend their money, how they want to play. All that's left to say now is thank you for watching, and I hope I see you in the next one.